Welcome to Stories We Love. I'm your hostess, Karen Laurie, and I get to interview really incredible people that I admire and appreciate, who are doing what I believe to be things that are very good for the world. And the point of this show is to inspire you, to maybe inspire you to take actions that benefit the world, to give you ideas about things that might be fun for you to do that benefit the world, and just to know about these incredible people. And my guest today is someone that I have the highest esteem for. I have been wanting to interview John Liu for over a year. When I first saw him on an interview or on a video about prisons to monastery. John Liu has been doing, he's a filmmaker and an ecologist. He's the ecosystem ambassador for the Common Land Foundation and the founder of the Ecosystems Restoration Camps and Communities, which is a worldwide movement. He's also on the advisory board for UN, the Decade of the Ecosystem and Restoration. And I'm just excited to get to know you and to understand more about what you're doing. I was reading about your camps and what you do. Do you want to, well, first of all, you do movies. You've done documentaries. What are the documentaries that you've done that people would want to look at if they're interested in this subject?
Well, on this subject specifically, ecosystem restoration, I think the first one that I did that had some impact was the lessons of the Loess Plateau, which is about the headwaters and the middle reaches of the Yellow River in China. And then the second one was Hope in a Changing Climate. The third one was called Green Gold, Regreening the Desert. The fourth one, I would say, is probably Kiss the Ground. Kiss the Ground was on Netflix, and then the other one is the series. It was a three-part series on PBS called The Age of Nature. And so the first episode was called The Age of Nature Awakening, and they covered my research and what I had documented in China. So those are those, but there are dozens of other films I made for the BBC and others on Africa and Mongolia and all South America, all over the world.
And then what got you so interested in ecology? Because you were doing news, and you were a producer and a cinematographer, right? For the news. So what changed? How did you change your path like that? What inspired that?
Well, I spent about a little more than 15 years, actually probably 15 to 17 years as a journalist. And I was very young. My father said I was not a very good student, so I should do something. And I went to China when I was 26 years old, and I built some video studios for educational use. And then the American television networks were opening their news bureaus. And my mother wrote to me and she said, yeah, you should look into this. And so I went over to CBS. I decided that CBS was the better network of the three. And this is pre-CNN, pre-Fox, everything. So the three networks were the choices. And so I just chose CBS, and I went over to see them. I'd been studying Chinese language for a year and building these television studios in China for educational use. And so I said, hey, hi, I'm John Liu, and you need me. And they said, you're hired. So suddenly I was working for CBS News, and I really didn't quite understand what was happening, but the journalists were, the old school journalist who had covered the Vietnam War and all of this stuff, and they became my peers and friends, and we had lunch together and worked together all the time, and we built the studio, and then covered the news. And that for a decade I just was watching China emerge from poverty and isolation. And then I was sent to Moscow to do the collapse of the Soviet Union and to other parts of the world to cover terrorism and so on and so on. And then my wife kind of said, well, hey, you're risking your life and I don't think they really care about you. And, maybe you should think about something else. And I wanted to get out of the news because I wanted to make films. So I went to work for Europeans and I worked for a number of years for Radio Televisione Italiana, the Italian state TV. And then the Germans came and they said, you have to work for us. And I said, well, I don't think so. I don't really, I'm happy with the Italians. And they said, no, you have to. And so they finally made it such generous offers that I couldn't say no. And then I built a studio for them and worked for a number of years for German TV. And in doing this, when the Germans came around, basically I had a lot of equipment, I had staff and so on. And so I could kind of decide what I wanted to do. I didn't have to cover the news. I had everything I needed. And the BBC was asking me, like, you have to make films for us. And so I said, okay, I'll do that. And then the World Bank came and they said, we want you to document the restoration of the cradle of Chinese civilization in the upper and middle reaches of the Yellow River. And I thought, well, I like that. I'd been actually doing some other environmental work, but I hadn't really learned yet the difference between environment and ecology. I was still thinking toxic substances and infrastructure for human use. And then I was sent to, there were a couple of different episodes. One was this Loess Plateau, another was a film on poverty, and then another one was a film for the global environment facility up in Mongolia, looking at called A Step Ahead, talking about the wilderness covering vast areas of the planet where the big migrations of gazelles and cranes and all sorts of wild horses and really the beautiful places. And I said, yes, I want to go there. And so I did that, and then I did this first thing out for the World Bank. And when I saw this, we put it in a film called before even the lessons of the Loess Plateau. I made a film about poverty with them that showed how hundreds of millions of people were being raised out of poverty in China. So this is like critically important for development in the world, that you could rapidly raise people out of poverty. You didn't have to institutionalize poverty and leave people in destitution forever. And when I saw this, they sent me to all over China, but they sent me on one of the shoots to the Loess Plateau, and I looked at it. I thought, oh my goodness, you're going to restore an area. The project was to restore an area the size of Belgium. So that was the pilot project, 35,000 square kilometers. And when I looked at that, I thought, and I started asking, like, do you think this is really possible? I mean, can you really restore these massively degraded cradles of civilization? So this is 10 to 12,000 years of agricultural impact, and it caused the collapse of more older iterations of the Chinese Empire and so on and so on. The capital had been there in the Loess Plateau, and then it moved to Beijing later on because you couldn't live there. The wealth, the rich and famous, or the powerful, they didn't want to live in a desert, so they moved to another place. And that left millions of very desperately poor people barely surviving there. And the area just looked amazing. I mean, I would stand on the top of a mountain and look around, and there was no vegetation. And then when I started to follow this, I learned what they were doing, because part of being a producer and documentarian is to learn what you're documenting. So as I was learning this, I started to compare what is the importance of restoring ecological function on the planet. in comparison to like even the giant geopolitical stories like the rise of China from poverty and isolation, or the collapse of the Soviet Union, or international terrorism. And I decided that the ecology was more important. And when I did that, I just sort of realized, oh, it's the degree of difficulty, the degree of complexity of this subject means I must spend the rest of my life studying this. I can't possibly understand this quickly. But I believe I had this feeling that this is more important than anything else I'd ever seen. And I've been to 90 countries, I've been all over the world. So when I realized this, I just got obsessive and began just to study and document restoration and consider what is the implication of what I'm seeing and documenting. And when I did that, I just, in the beginning, I started to tell people, I quit journalism and just, started to do this. And everybody was like, what are you doing? That's not, that's not a very good move, professionally. And on the other hand, to me, it made some kind of other sense, logic. It's not about the bottom line. It's about the health and well-being of humanity, the survival of the human civilization, which is more important, And I said, okay, I get it. It's sacrifice is required to follow this path, but on the other hand, it's a flourishing path. It's a path that shows you the underlying fundamental truths of how all living things are interconnected and how life emerged and is connected to all the energy throughout eternal time and throughout the cosmos. So, well, that's like, I'll do that, and so that's how I got into this.
I love, it seems like a theme among people that I have interviewed, that everybody says, you can't do that. That's, nobody's going to you can't make money doing that. And they don't get the deeper resonance that someone might feel about the path that they chose. And I believe, just listening to you and seeing how it's working out, trusting that resonance, or that sense of like, this is what I want to do, is a form of what I call integrity, that to me is really important, because a lot of people will do things because it makes money versus doing something because it really resonates with who they are at the level of their spirit or their soul, or whatever you want to call it. And so I'm hearing that from you, and that really, that just confirms to me that you're on a path that I can really admire and respect.
Well, thank you. I guess I would look at it slightly differently. We definitely have free will, but when you're confronted with knowledge or privilege, then you have a responsibility. And so you have free will. You can say, well, I'm not going to take the responsibility for that, or I'm going to deny what I'm seeing is real and pretend that the superficial things that are going on in the society somehow are more important. But that's not much of a choice. I mean, like, really, it's sort of, you could say, well, I don't have the strength, or the strength of character, or I don't have the courage to make this choice. But that's about the only thing, so you can then you're on a long slide, I think, to oblivion. And on the other one, you're kind of trying at least to fulfill your destiny and have meaning and purpose in life. And so, finally, that's not much of a choice. You knowledge is responsibility, privilege is responsibility. So if I have the opportunity, if I'm standing there and I see this and I understand what it means, I really can't. And I mean, also, especially after long period of time as a professional observer, I can't look at the most important thing that I've ever seen and say, oh, well, I'm just going to ignore that.
So you mentioned the flourishing path, which I think is a theme for you, and then you just mentioned the most important thing you've ever seen, which seems to me to be connected. Can you talk about the flourishing path and the most important thing that you have ever seen and how they relate?
Well, I think that what I'm seeing now, for instance, like in China, if you talk about may you live in interesting times, that's not really a good thing. That's sort of a curse. That means you're forced in because there's war or there's collapsing political systems or there's some disastrous and you have to deal with it. You can't not deal with it. You have to deal with it. So um, that's sort of what I have noticed by going to the ancient cradles of civilization. And it started with the Chinese, but actually I'd been to Rome already, and I've been to Egypt, and I've been to the Aztec and Inca civilizations, and into India, and so into Tibet, and to north all over the North American continent. So I've basically been to all continents, and in looking at this and realizing that our cosmologies, our history, our ancestors emerged in a functional ecosystems, and these functional ecosystems are not magical, they're logical, they're ecological, so they're ecological. And so when you understand eco logic, then there's a kind of a pathway, and that is the flourishing path, because it's massively beautiful, massively biodiverse, and it's interconnected because everything is symbiotically related and co-evolved together to achieve certain things. For instance, one of those is the natural climate regulation. Another would be the fertility in the soils and the health of all the living things. So this is all self-organized and co-evolved to happen.
Right.
And then human beings emerge into that. And they have, it's also said in almost all the sacred texts in different religions, different cosmologies, that, well, humans have free will. Humans are flawed. If you go to like the more dogmatic ones, humans sin and they're evil. They have the potential of evil. And this, I think, is it's kind of true. Human beings often make mistakes. So understanding that's also where you might see the thought of forgiveness or of compassion or generosity and kindness. I mean, a lot of things, love, could emerge to help to moderate the potentiality of bad behavior.
Mm-hmm.
But it also, in most of the sacred texts, it's like, there's results. Bad behavior has repercussions. There are feedback loops. So in studying evolution, I began to understand that, it's logical. And like the loss of hydrology, say droughts or floods or, all the impacts from these things, they're not exactly, they're results. It's cause and effect. So if you do this, this will happen, and so if you do this, you can't expect that this won't happen. So if you reduce, so essentially I found three, and that's very simplified because I found 31 or something like that. I could put on the back of an envelope, but that was too much for anybody to like. You can't talk about that to people because they're like, oh. But if I just talk about the three: biodiversity, biomass, that means living material, and necromass, which is dead material, but it's also, you could call it, say, the accumulation of organic material, but it's necromass. So necromass is a direct analogy to biomass. So all biomass dies. So that means that life and death are part of a cycle, and it's all part of the energy that flows eternally through the cosmos. So, we need to have it, but we're sort of stuck in lesser consciousness often.
Yeah.
And we're at a place where that does not serve us at this time.
Right.
If we do not actually go to the next level of human civilization, there are consequences now. And there were consequences before, but they're serious on a planetary scale at this point.
Yeah. And when you were talking about, you went to that place on the Yellow River in China,
The Loess Plateau.
Loess.
Loess, the Loess Plateau. It's a
Loess.
German word. It's a scientific term.
Oh, not a Chinese word. Interesting.
Well, they call it Huangtu Gaoyuan in Chinese, but that's not really what it was described in Western science as a soil type. It's a sedimentary soil.
Oh, okay.
With high high mineral density. So it's very nutrient rich, but it requires organic material to have real fertility, to be bioavailable.
So you went there and you were part of that restoration of that, what did you say, 35,000 square kilometers? Is that what you said?
I documented it. So
Okay.
the World Bank, the Chinese government joined together in this giant project, which was really the largest restoration project ever attempted at that time. I think we're working on one that's bigger now in Egypt, but so this pilot project was enormous, and I was asked to document it. So I had to meet with the planners and the scientists and with the actual workers on the ground and with the hydrologists and with the political people and the financial people to understand how are they doing this. Because we're talking about a place where most of the people were illiterate, so if you're going to spend $500 million to do a giant development project, you have to create an entire new organization, because you can't just hand over the $500 million to illiterate peasants. What would they do with this? So you have to have. They had mapping systems from GPS, so it was the first time I really saw very effective GPS management. So all of the river systems, it was a watershed rehabilitation project. So every rivulet, a tiny flow, any place where water ever flowed, that had a unique resource location. And so anything that, if you said, well, we're going to go to this place, then you could write down the URL, and then everybody would know that's at this latitude, longitude, that's where it is. And so we said, we're going to invest this much money, and we're going to use this methodology. The farmers are going to come in and they're going to level everything, and in the gullies where the erosion is happening, they're going to do this and this and this and we're going to spend this much money. And then you can then go back and look okay, what's the result? Well, that worked very well. These barriers created the sediment, captured the sediment, and now they're flat fields. And those fields have increased organic material and plants, and they're becoming massively biodiverse. And so the system is returning to functionality.
And you're doing this in a way that's like a permaculture way, not a way of using petrol fertilizers, petrol, glyphosate, stuff like that, or how are you doing it?
Well,
doing it?
Glyphosates. These are poisons. They're herbicides. Fertilizers. I can't say they didn't use any fertilizers. They might use fertilizers in certain places, but probably not in reforestation efforts. They might use it if they're trying to do grain crops or something else, but they won't need them if they use permaculture, as you're calling it. But I mean, it's really organic gardening, or it's natural regenerative agriculture might be a better term for it. So what they were doing was they were learning by doing, so they were taking a degraded landscape, and they had a hypothesis, like, if we restore the viability of the soil, we restore the vegetation, and we restore the biodiversity, we could bring back we would be more aligned with evolutionary succession. So if you have evolutionary succession, it has always more biodiversity, always more biomass, always more accumulated organic matter, always more productivity, always more functionality. So always more climate regulation, everything about this. That means that the density of the air, the physics aspects of this are changed by life. But if we're stupid and we are like, cut everything down, I don't care about this biodiversity, I don't care about this biomass, I don't care about the soils, and then everything's gone, then you don't have any functionality, you don't have any water, you don't have, it doesn't remain, doesn't infiltrate, it's not retained. So basically, they were there. They had already destroyed the civilization. All the power and wealth had left, and you had these desperate people living in poverty. So in a denuded landscape that looked like the moon, it might have as well as been Mars or the moon. So when they changed this, and also everything that the people were doing was banned, was made illegal. So the people were cutting trees. The people were planting on the sides of hillsides, because all the gullies, everything had eroded, and soils had already eroded away. It was down to like geologic materials. So you really couldn't actually farm it. You might, if you put on artificial fertilizers, you might get something, but it would be ridiculously expensive and difficult and dysfunctional. So basically it said, you can't do that anymore. You can't plant on the sides of hills. You can't cut trees, and you can't free range goats and sheep, which was the major thing, because there was nothing left. You couldn't really farm, and they cut all the trees down. So the last thing they were doing was running goats and sheep, and they were just eating anything that stuck its head up. And that's what you see in the Middle East too. It's also donkeys and camels and all sorts of things. But anyway, they were all of these things. The Chinese said, well, that doesn't work. The scientists were sent in. They actually said to the Chinese Academy of Science, okay, it's your responsibility to scientifically answer the question. So when the scientists went in there, they went, well, you can't have functional ecosystems until you restore the biodiversity, the biomass, and the accumulated organic matter. Then you'll have infiltration, retention of moisture. You'll have soil fertility naturally restored. And you'll have a canopy that alters where the solar radiation hits. So if the solar radiation hits the top of the canopy, it's not directly hitting the soil. So if you measure the temperature on the soil that has a canopy above it, it's going to be 15 to 20 degrees lower than if you hit the solar radiation directly hits the ground. Well, that's huge. That's not 1.5 or 2 degrees centigrade differences in global climate averages. That's 15 to 20 degrees centigrade difference by natural interruption of the solar radiation by a natural tree canopy.
Wait, that's centigrade.
Centigrade, yeah.
Wow, then that's really a lot of temperature difference.
Massive temperature difference.
Wow, I didn't realize that. Oh, wow. And right now, did that whole 35,000 square kilometers, is it restored now? Is it back?
Well, the Age of Nature Awakening, I think the fourth film I mentioned, it has a transition from 25 years. So the other films have earlier periods. So you can see what the changes are. You can see what it was like in 1994. And then you can see what it was like in 2009. And you can also see what it's like in 2005 in the lessons of the Loess Plateau. And in 2009, it's in Hope in a Changing Climate and Kiss the Ground. And then it's 25 years, after 25 years, in The Age of Nature. And it's just, I mean, it's night and day. You know, there's desert and nothing, but maybe the rainfall is still the same. But instead of the rainfall being infiltrated and recycled again and again below the tree canopy, it's just evaporated away and goes into the upper atmosphere, where it's a greenhouse gas and further warms up the planet. And you know, if it infiltrates into the ground, then it remains moist and can feed. And then it's also in the biomass. It's in the plants itself. So your body is 70% water. So if you have all these plants everywhere, it's all water. So they're a reservoir of water. And you know, so yes, it's a transformational change. And of course, the Chinese, I mean, I've been covering the Chinese for more than 40 years, and, you know, it's getting close to 50. Oh, dear. So, you know, basically what the Chinese have done is transformed their civilization in a half a century. And they've done this by making a lot of correct decisions about what they're doing. I mean, you might disagree with authoritarian regimes or something and say, oh, democracy is better. Well, I don't know. If you're having mass shootings all the time where children are killed in their schools, how is that better? You know, so, you know, it's what you see in China is that they made a decision. We don't think that we want everybody to be poor. We want everybody to have an opportunity and affluence. I think that's the kind of the American dream in a way, you know. But this is the Chinese dream. You know, they want their people to be, and they want them all to participate and collaborate together. So when they saw this change in the Loess Plateau, they said, okay, that's enough. 10 years after they had this pilot project, they said, okay, we see what that does. That's law. So now you can't cut a naturally occurring tree anywhere in China, or you can't farm on the sides of hillsides, and you can't free range goats and sheep everywhere you want to and denude everything. So you can't do that anymore. So you have to do something else. So what do? You do what they did in Loess Plateau. You teach the people how to restore the landscapes. That becomes a business. Everybody who gets into that business gets rich, and they get rich from bringing back the hydrology, the climate regulation, the fertility, and the biodiversity. Well, that's good.
Richness of nature. Nature in itself is so abundant, right? Nature itself, one seed can make a forest, or one seed can make a field of flowers, you know, over time, because of one seed creates a tree with more seeds, or a flower with more.
Well, you need genetic diversity.
Right,
so
but
you need about 350 individuals. If you go below that, probably it's going to be difficult. So, but yes.
I just mean in general, because when you look at it, and the diversity is so key. And I think nature to me teaches me about how important diversity is, like how important it is in life, in people, in animals. We, you know, there's a diversity of plants, there's a diversity of soil types, there's a diversity of insects, and there's a diversity of animals, and there's a diversity of people. And to me, I think that diversity is so charming and so inspiring and so exciting. And I love that about the world. I love the diversity of thought. I love the diversity of, you know, ideas that people have, right? And so one of the ideas you have that I think is so cool is the camp thing. That sounds so fun. Can you talk about what you do with the camp? It's an ecological restoration camps, right? So
right. Well, this is so gradually, after seeing the Loess Plateau and then working to convince the Africans, especially in Rwanda and Ethiopia, to do the same things. And then thinking, how can we do this all over the world? And then working with large groups to do that, I realized that these large projects don't exactly engage everyone. They sort of empower certain people, experts, and wealthy, maybe even corrupt parts of other governments, get involved, and then the people who actually have to do the work don't necessarily have the same opportunities or the same status as the people who are managing the program. And so I thought, well, actually, we just don't have time to wait. It might take 5 years to design a really big project, and it might take a year or two to raise the money, the large amounts of money to do this. It could take that long. We actually need to have everybody engaged in working in restoration now. And also, it may be the catalyst to change the irrational parts of the economy. So like you could see that people were trying to extract things, and people were trying to manufacture and buy and sell things. And they said that that was creating wealth. And for the people who bought and sold things, and they got rich, and then the other people got poorer and poorer until the place was completely ruined. And then they had nothing. So actually, it's not true. It didn't create wealth, it created poverty. And so what's interesting about the restoration concept is you're creating value. And this is real value. It lasts. It means water. It means fertility. It means biodiversity. And it's not false. It doesn't create externalities that are not accounted for. It creates abundance. It creates beauty. It creates wealth. It creates health as well. So if we understand what this means and we engage the whole population of the planet, and it doesn't only benefit human beings, it benefits all living things. But if all human beings said, oh, well, we're stewards of the planet, so we're going to do our best to ensure that there's biodiversity, biomass, and accumulated organic matter, and that's going to re-regulate the stream flows and infiltrate and retain moisture and circulate moisture in the lower hydrological cycle instead of sending moisture into the upper atmosphere, where it's creating chaos by coming down too much and having huge floods in one place, but it's having other places turning into deserts. So if we change that, then we're doing something which is creating value. It's the most valuable thing we can do. It's the great work of our time.
Right. And the word ecos in Greek means our home. So the study of our home, ecology, is it's so beautiful, and to restore our home is so beautiful. So I love it. So in these camps, what I was reading about is that you sent me a PDF that was so cool. And it was kind of like a day or a week at a camp. And it was talking about how people come from all over the world and they go to these camps that I think there's like 60 camps right now or something like that all over the world.
Well, we just changed the name to communities.
Okay,
So
communities.
it started as camps, and I think that it's camps and communities is accurate. Because when you start, you might have a camp. When you get to a certain point, you have a community. And we all need to go to this place where we have communities, where we're living in community, we're caring for one another. And we decide, like, well, there's no reason that anybody has to be hungry in our community. We feed everybody. Let's not buy and sell and commodify it. Let's just say we love each other, we trust each other, we care for one another. So nobody in this community is going hungry. And so then the food is grown organically, it's healthy, it transfers to the community kitchen, and there's no packaging, and it doesn't come from the other side of the world, and it's organic because you grew it, and everybody can be engaged and involved with master gardeners leading and everybody helping. And then it can come here and everybody can be involved. So who has the time to grow soils or to plant or to harvest or to work in the kitchens and take care? It's the homeless, it's the hungry, it's the refugees. So we empower them, we give them beautiful community kitchens, we give them communal gardens with the master gardeners to train everybody. Everybody can become a master gardener. They just have to spend enough time with the master gardener as their teacher. And then we have cultural stages, and we can have music and dancing and education and movies and all. We can have co-creator spaces, so we can all go and use the tools and the machines. It's not like I own this, get your own tools, And so we all have garages filled with tools that get used once a year or something. What's the point of that? Let's have all the best tools and let's collate them and curate them with master craftsmen and scientists and engineers. And so everybody learns from the scientists and the engineers how to use the best machines. And you want to repair anything? Well, of course, we go there and the master looks at it and we all study and then we do that. And so we don't have to extract more stuff and build more stuff and go to giant stores and package it in a bunch of crap and then throw everything away. It's better. It's just like we have to envision the new society. And we have to realize that a civilization where human beings get to survive is based on functional ecosystems. It's not based on extraction and manufacturing and buying and selling things. And if we're not going to have war, if we're going to have peace, we have to take care of everybody. You can't say, oh, these people don't matter, they can die in the street. And if people have mental illness or something, we got to help them to overcome this. We can't just say, oh, get out, and then of course they will get automatic weapons. Let those proliferate all over the place. Or how about train people who have post-traumatic stress disorder after years of war in another culture that they didn't understand, they didn't know why they were there. And all of those things are real, and we have to process that. And how are we going to deal with that? Well, let's deal with it locally in little camps and communities. And let's make sure everybody's cared for. But we have to do this simultaneously everywhere on the earth right now. So this can't just be done in one country or another country, because the ecology is global. So we have to learn how to act as a species on a planetary scale. And we have to have a shared intention where we're saying, we understand this. It's not impossible to understand that the water must infiltrate into the soil, that there's a critical mass for condensation and precipitation, and that we actually know how that happens. And we know the physics impacts if we don't do that. And so, okay, let's all learn that. Let's learn that. Let's not say our reason to go to school is to compete against everybody else so we make more money. And so we're controlling them. That's coming from feudalism. That's coming from imperialism and colonization over centuries and millennia. And it's ugly and horrible. It's not where we want to be. We want to care for everyone. We want everyone to be equal, and we want everyone to be free, and everyone to be healthy and kind, and live and achieve their heart's desire, because that's the purpose of life.
And so in these, I love what you're saying because it's so true. And yeah, everybody's valuable. Everybody's important.
Everybody's equal.
And everybody's equal. And everybody is so connected to nature, whether they know it or not. They are nature. We all are an aspect of nature. And I love, so in these communities, in these camps, what seems to be happening is that they're taking desertified areas or areas that are over like monocropped that didn't work very well or something where the soil has not become healthy and they're reconstituting it. Is that right? Are they doing
Well, you
work?
can look at it in several ways. So basically, each community is essentially place-based. So the first camp we created is in Spain, and it's in what's called the Altiplano. So it's in Murcia at the border with Andalusia. And many of the indigenous oak trees were cut down to build the Spanish Armada. There's a special curve that makes a great thing for shipbuilding. So they cut all these trees and they built the Spanish Armada, and then it sunk in a day, in a weekend, So all of that. And so hundreds of years of impact now from from taking out all these trees. And so what we find is, I think you probably saw some of my, so my understanding is that when you remove the vegetation, when you remove the canopy, you expose the surface of the earth to solar radiation. Well, when you do that, you naturally elevate the temperature on the surface, and that creates thermic drafts. Now, when you follow the physics in that, one thing that it does, so even if rainfall remains the same, instead of infiltrating and going into the bodies of all this biomass and then breathing, which breathing would be like, let's think of it like sweating, and that's cooling, but it's recycled below the canopy with lower temperatures. So it's humid and moist. But if you have removed the canopy and the radiation creates these thermic drafts, it pushes the moisture into the upper atmosphere. So then it goes away. Then it doesn't condense and precipitate there. So you've changed everything. You've changed the density of the air, you've changed the wind direction often, and you might be creating vortex activity. That's at the highest levels. And then you're not reaching critical mass for condensation and precipitation, so it's not raining. As you follow that, and you look at what happened to the Egyptians, or you look at what happened in Mesopotamia, or you look at what happened in China or in India or Aztec or Inca, basically it's always the same. We don't know that. So if we don't learn that and understand that, then we repeat it. But in the past, that was localized. And so that civilization could sort of fail, and another civilization would emerge on another part of the planet. We're done with that. We have a global civilization, and that global civilization has been the dominant cultural thought has come sadly from Europe. A later thought than some of the earlier spiritual understandings or whatever. It's materialism. And that materialism accrues to individuals and disenfranchises others. And so we have to change that. If we don't, we have billions of poor people, but a few billionaires. So this is not going to work out now. So we have to look at this. And the camps and communities are a place to practice. Let's go practice. If you don't know how to grow soils, and you don't know how to grow plants, and you don't know how to protect the biodiversity or restore the hydrology, I don't think we're going to work. It's not going to work. We have 8 billion people, and if all of them are going shopping and they think they're going to work to make money, to pay the rent, to do this or that, well, if nobody is going to restore the soil, the plants, and the biodiversity and the hydrology and climate regulation, we're not going to have anything. There will be no economy.
Yeah. What do you think of the people who are into, creating GMO stuff or doing conventional farming? Like, how does that compare to what you're talking about?
Well, conventional farming is essentially ancient slash and burn on steroids. So if you just take huge areas and you plow them up, what are you doing? You're exposing the soils to solar radiation. That's exactly what I was talking about when you disrupt the hydrological cycle. And you're killing your, what do we use UV radiation for? We use it to kill microbes. So if we're going to ship fruit from California around the world, it has to pass through UV radiation to kill all the microbes before any country will allow it in. And to get into California, if it's coming from someplace else, you got to do that. So what's that mean if we put the solar radiation directly on the soil? We're killing the microbial layer at the top of the soil.
Which
What's
we
the
need, right?
Well, the microbiology in the soil is what makes mineral nutrients bioavailable to plants. So of course we need it. And
Yeah.
if we kill the microbes, then they can't do what they do through natural means. So we need fertilizers because the plants won't grow unless they can get nutrients, and they can't get any nutrients because we killed the habitat for the microbes, which did that job over evolutionary time for billions of years. And why do we think that making our bags of chemical fertilizers are better than the natural R&D that took place over billions of years for a system which is living and self-replicating and renewable forever? Why would it's crazy. So we've gone into some sort of alternate, absurdity. And I mean, if you read Voltaire 500 years ago or 350 years ago, it was already known, that human beings are irrational and that it's sort of absurd, and we need to go beyond that. So we're going to have to meditate our way, or educate ourselves to the point where we have a higher level of consciousness. And so I think that's where we are now. And if we don't achieve that, we're facing predictable catastrophic outcomes. So now is the time or never. It's now or never, so.
Yeah, and it's interesting, there's a lot of people who say, oh, there's no climate change, the climate's always been changing. But what we do have is a loss of species. We do have more pollution. We do have more desertification in land and in the ocean, which is kind of weird, like areas that are dead zones in the ocean. We do have more, the five gyres or more that are in the ocean. So the whole argument about there's climate change is not, I think if we take it out of climate change and instead of just put it into the fact that, hey, we're losing species. Hey, we need to clean up. We need to make sure that the soil is healthy. We need to plant biodiversity. We need to bring back the species that are just on the edge by planting a biodiversity of things. Like, what's your thought on that?
Well, my thought about that is that opinion is irrelevant in these cases because it's all measurable. And I would say a colleague in Sweden, now I'm working in Germany, is Johan Rockström, and his planetary boundaries explanation is measurable, fundamentally true. It's undeniable if you believe in science. Then you understand we are already crossing these things, but we don't have a theoretical problem. We don't have it's not a policy issue. What it is physical disruptions on a planetary scale to symbiotic, interrelated ecological systems.
Mm-hmm.
So if we don't restore that physically, nothing, we can't, like on the internet, solve this by choosing like or something. That means nothing. It's soil microbes and it's fungal nets, and it's how all plant life is interrelated, how we're breathing in symbiosis with, so animals are breathing in symbiosis with plants, and that constantly filters and continuously renews the oxygenated atmosphere. It creates, constantly filters, and continuously renews the hydrological cycle. But now the rivers are dying, they're drying up, they're dammed, and this is not correct. And soil fertility is being leached out to where the scientific opinion, I don't want to believe in it because it's too horrible to think about it. But they are calculating, like, if we continue to do industrial agriculture, we only have so many years more of where we can have anything before we just turn the soil into this sterile, desert. So we shouldn't do that. We have to change. And what you find if you go to camp, the ecosystem restoration camps and communities, is there are all these people and they're having fun and they're growing fertile soils, and they can increase the organic layer, they can increase the carbon sequestration, they can have fertility. So, okay, that's proof. Now we have enough proof because we've done this all over the world. The UN and anybody who studies this would have to say, well, that's true. Like, you have to do that. So we have to do that. And so it's not about, like, is it true or not? It's about whether we have the political will and the courage to transform human civilization away from materialism to a living, self-replicating, egalitarian, participatory system, which works. So that's what we are required to do.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating when you were just kind of saying that the egalitarian system, you think of the nematodes and the erythropods and the mycorrhizal fungi and the whatever other parts of the microbes and all that stuff. It's so fascinating how they all work with the roots of the plant, and they work with the plant, and they bring the nutrients, and there's such a choreography that is so brilliant.
The dance of life.
Yeah, it's the dance of life, and you can see it in soil, but you can see it in in the way a bird can drop a seed somewhere and then a forest grows, or where animals leave their waste and that nourishes the soil. And there's this whole, it's so beautiful to me, it's awe-inspiring to me, it makes me high in the natural way to see how brilliant nature is and how much nature perseveres and wants to grow and wants to provide abundance. It's so beautiful. And so I really think what you're talking about, like, those camps feel really fun. That seems like something that'd be really fun to do, where you go and you learn about how to grow it and meet people that are interested in participating in making more healthy food. When there are people in America that are buying up, like people in corporations buying up a lot of the farmland to be the more conventional farmland, to me that seems like it's going exactly the opposite of what you're talking about. And it seems like I wish that they would, I wish that countries would subsidize organic, regenerative, or not subsidize the conventional stuff, so that we could really start to restore that orchestration, that choreography, that dance of life in all of the things. And it seems like what you were saying when you're talking about the hydrological system, are you talking, when you are restoring places, when you're doing restoration in some area, does it change the weather patterns? Do the weather patterns get more gentle and more homogenized, or how does that affect it?
Well, I think that's measurable. So you have monitoring and assessment. So you have to make judgments. You have to make decisions. Like, we're going to try this, but we're going to measure it, and we'll know. We won't guess whether this is going to work. We'll know whether it did that or not. And I would say that what we're learning now, we're going into an area where there are more and more places, but it's not about individuals making decisions. It's not about my opinion or my knowledge or anything. It's about how many people can we have to put their minds together on this. And it may be that the minds of many people who have never considered these issues and are unpolluted with concepts or thoughts, they will now they don't have preconceived ideas, and they start to study this, and they'll have revelations about what can be done. And what we're seeing is that especially there are large numbers of people who are actually in need. So we have the homeless and the hungry and the refugees, and it's not small. It's huge, millions, really millions, maybe tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions potentially. So, and ultimately, it's all 8 billion plus people on the earth who need to come to grips with, like, what is this? So if we use what I've been calling collaborative inquiry for collective intelligence, then we can start to think together, work together, experiment together, play together. And, it's a little bit like going back to kindergarten or going back to school. So here we are, we've got our little buckets, and we've got our little shovels, and but we know more than this. We have science, we know more. We know we can make a ground covers, we can make mulch, we can have giant nurseries, we can save endangered species, we can do all kinds of things. So we need to do that. And as we start to do this, we say, well, how are we going to do this? And, like, do we have to get large grants, or we have to get vast amounts of money? Well, what about if everybody shares $10 a month? So if you and I both share $10 a month, then we have, in a year, we have $240. But if a million people share $10 a month, you have $240 million at the end of the year. So all we have to do is share. And then if you want to go to camp, you want to learn how to grow soils, you want to learn how to restore the hydrological cycle, or you want to learn about botany or biodiversity, or be a master gardener, well, then you're going to have people there who can teach you that. And then you can say, oh, I'm now a master gardener. And also I'm, you can work in the kitchen. You can play music on the stage. You have a community. You can care for the people who need it. And so if we all do that, then that is the society. We're living the change that we want to see. And we can't just go like, oh, all these corporations, and we don't believe in that government, or we don't believe in this or that, this ism. I don't think it matters what we, this kind of anger or protesting, or, it just matters that we have to act, and we have to live what we want to see. So we're going to have to build more camps. We're going to have to live in those camps. We're going to have to, or communities. So we're in communities, and we're caring for one another, and we're having really good organic food, and we're having really good music and really good dancing, and we're all sharing a little bit to make it happen. And it's not happening in one country, it's not happening in one state, it's happening on a planetary scale. So maybe we have to go to 10 million and 50 million and 100 million and a billion people who are supporting this. And then you've got camps and communities all around the world. Everybody who wants to go can go. And you can build more and more. I don't like that one. Well, I'm going to create my own. All right, create your own. Get your own people together, and let's do it.
And so when people are doing these camps and communities, are they living there forever, or do they go for a month or 3 months or a year, or like, how is it up to them?
All of the camps are self-organizing, self-governing, and autonomous. So it's a distributed network. It's a movement that's deciding that, well, we've got to do this, and if not us, who, So, I mean, if you understand what I'm talking about, you understand what all these thousands, tens of thousands of people are doing in the world now. And that's after just less than 6 years. So we're in our 6th year. So in 5 years, we've got 60 camps and communities going, and some are big. So, what's interesting is thousands and tens of thousands of people are willing to do this. It's not culturally specific. It's in South America, it's in Central America, it's in North America, it's in Africa, it's in East Africa, West Africa, South Africa, North Africa, it's in Europe, it's in Asia, it's in India, it's anywhere, everywhere, because anybody can do it. And all we have to do is say, okay, well, I want to share to that. We have foundations. There's a 501c3 foundation in the United States. There's an OMBI EU foundation in Europe. There'll be new foundations if they're required. And every single one of the camps and communities has its own structure, its own legal entity. And some are private, and some are cooperatives, and some are nonprofits, and some, they're all different. Well, we can't decide what you do. We're not ordering anybody to do anything. Just if you want to do this, then let's do it together, because together we're strong, and individually we're limited, we're weak. So together, when we all come together, we have everything. When we share, we all have everything.
When I was 18, I sailed from California to Hawaii, and we anchored in a bay that was called Kaneohe, and I was going to UH, so I had to take the dinghy, because the bay, so I had to take the dinghy to the shore. And one morning I got up and my dinghy was gone, and I saw 3 big, huge guys in my dinghy, and I yelled across the water, "Hey, you got my dinghy. Did you steal my dinghy?" And they said, "No." I said, "What do you mean? I can't get to school." And they said, "We'll pick you up." And so they rowed over, they picked me up. I said, "Why did you take my dinghy?" They said, "We're Samoans, we share everything." And I said, "Oh, that's so beautiful." And they said, "Yeah, we'll just pick you up. You just yell if we're out, and we'll take you back to your boat anytime you need, or take you to school or to the shore anytime you need." And so we had this great connection. These 3 guys, they were fishing, they were getting food for themselves. I wasn't using my dinghy while I was at school, and I wasn't using the dinghy when I was asleep, and they just used it and brought it back when I needed it, and chauffeured me. And I remember thinking, I was 18, and I thought, that is so beautiful, just to have that consciousness that we share things, and that's so it just feels so important. So I love what you're talking about. And what I'd love, say that if people want to join this, I'd like to get the links that they can do that.
Yeah, the URL is ecosystemrestorationcommunities.org.
So we'll put that on ecosystemrestorationcommunities.org. We'll put that as a little.
That's fine. Yes, that's fine. Put that on. And let me just say that we're talking about this concept. So all the different places are different right now, but we're starting to come to grips with what is a social infrastructure for this. So we want to do restoration of the ecology, but in order to do that, we are actually healing the human spirit. There's so much unhappiness, so much trauma around since the pandemic, but not only really, it's the endless wars and the kind of class differentiations with poverty, racism. I mean, there's so many problems. So what we're thinking about is like, okay, if we have, and when you talk, also you mentioned about industrial agriculture. Half of the food in industrial agriculture is wasted because it has little imperfections. They just throw it away. We don't need this. What we need to do is grow food together in communal gardens and carry it directly to the community kitchens. And we need to cook. Everybody's eating fresh food, and any surplus is then processed by dehydration or by fermentation or by canning or by making sauces or soups or something. We can do everything with this. And that also gets everybody collaborating on it. What else have we got to do? That's doing things which are pointless when that needs to be done. So let's do that. And there are a lot of people who are homeless and hungry. Well, let's not let them be miserable. Let's let them work in the communal gardens, and let them work in the collective, in the community kitchens, and let's let them play music on the cultural stages. And also, let's have co-working spaces in all the ecosystem restoration camps and communities, so the digital nomads can go from communities to camps all around the world, sharing their knowledge of technology, of finance, of management, of communications. And so this is a mycelial network. The stronger the mycelial network becomes, the more this grows. And to do this, everybody should be equal. So everybody should share $10 per month to the foundation, so that they are equal owners. It's their movement. And then it grows and grows and serves all the needs of all, not the needs of some. And this mycelial network makes it strong. And so we don't need a centralized administration. We can have a distributed administration. We can have seed banks and nurseries. We can have education. We can take care of the children. We can take care of future generations. All of this can be done through this method. And it's what people choose, how they organize themselves. And when they organize themselves perfectly, we go, oh, look at that. They organize themselves perfectly. Let's all share that. Let's all learn that from them, because they did such a good job. And so we can celebrate everything that's good. And it immediately goes through the mycelial network everywhere in the world. So, oh, that works. Do it. That doesn't work. Well, we're going to have to rethink that. And, let's have who did that better. And, oh, they did it better over there. Okay, spread it all over the world. And so that's what we're doing. We have to be a family. And sometimes the family is a little dysfunctional, but, we still have to be a family. We have to love each other. We have to care for each other. And we have to have the courage to do what needs to be done. And now we're at this place where we're threatened by toxicity. We're threatened by inequality. We're threatened by violence. We're threatened
Food
by,
toxicity.
everything. So
Vaccines in food, vaccines in vegetables and in meat, that makes no sense to me.
So let's get everybody together and let's do collaborative inquiry for collective intelligence, so that we all get healthy, so that we all are kind to one another, that we don't talk about opinion. We talk about collaborative learning, so that we have a shared intention. And our intention is, if you're well taken care of, I'm well taken care of. We can all be well taken care of. So let's do that.
Right. And it's such an abundance. I mean, nature really is the example of abundance. You see it everywhere that nature is allowed to grow. And it's perseverant. I do live on hills. I live on a cliff. And there are trees that come out and then they go up. They go to the sun, and that, wow, that is some resilient tree that has been living there for decades and is not even in the, it's in a hill, and it's just figured it out. And then you see this another tree right near it that came from its seeds that's starting to grow up. And it's just amazing how abundant nature is. And the ideas that people say about, we have a food shortage, so we have to use GMO food and we have to use this conventional farming, doesn't make any sense to me when you look at nature, because nature provides way more than people and animals can handle. And so it's a way to give back. It's a way to, like you said, to can, or to all the other things that you can do. And it's just so obvious how caring whatever created this beautiful planet is, because it's so obviously rich. It's so obviously wanting to be in its natural state. It's so obvious a place of abundance and a place of feeding. I understand that our nutrients come from the soil into the plants or into the animals that eat the plants. And so those nutrients from the soil, those microbes and all those things, it's so orchestrated with such brilliance and such care, such thoughtfulness. Like whatever created this, the thoughtfulness and the care and the brilliance. And if we can learn to, what you're talking about, work in harmony with that collaborative, because nature is collaborative, that collaborative creativity and co-creation, it makes so much sense. I like to mimic everything that nature does, like as best I can in my life, and just practice being what nature teaches through nature's example. She's the best example. So
Yeah. Well, I think you're in some ways, there's the creation, the cosmology from Judeo-Christian Islamic world is a creation. So human beings emerge in the Garden of Eden in this. And evolutionary succession looks at evidence in the soils. And I started thinking about this because it looks like in the Judeo-Christian Islamic world, human beings emerge in paradise. And when I look at evolutionary time, I realize that 3.8 billion years since the evolutionary time, and 4.567 billion years on the Earth, according to people who study this. And when I look at it, I think, well, human beings emerged in paradise. It was an oxygenated atmosphere, a freshwater system. But that wasn't the way it was 4.5 billion years ago. So if 6 days is in God time equals 4.567 billion years, then maybe that's exactly the same. Evolutionary succession and creation doesn't disagree. But then you have to look at the second part of that cosmology, because it says that human beings sinned and were cast out of the garden. And so if I look at that, I think, well, what does that mean? You know, the snake and the apple thing. And I'm not sure. But if that's a metaphor, I think I know what original sin was. It was the reduction of biodiversity that led to the reduction in biomass, which led to the reduction in the accumulation of organic matter. And then all the systems to regulate the planet were disrupted after that. And giant deserts were formed, and then you had to work to survive. I mean, the cosmology and evolution, they look the same in this way. And so we have to go back to the garden. We have to restore the functionality of the ecosystems. Our science is telling us exactly the same thing. The consequences are quite serious. So the consequence of destroying the Garden of Eden is not going to come out well. So we need to restore the Garden of Eden, and then we can live in paradise.
And I really feel metaphorically that the Garden of Eden is all around each of us, and that the more that we can each restore it, whether you go to a community or a camp, or you grow your food in your backyard and restore that area, or you do whatever you can do in your community. There's so many things that we can do. There's a guy in LA, I wish I could interview him, but I think he's pretty busy. He's called the Gangster Gardener. And he started to grow food in his backyard, and then he had such an abundance, so he started feeding his neighborhood, because they don't have good stores in
I've met him. I've been to his place.
Maybe you can connect me up.
I can do that. I'll help.
I think what he's doing is so beautiful. And then the city said you cannot grow things on the the part past the sidewalk that the city owns, and he said, "Fuck you, I'm going to do it." And he took him to court and he won. And so now all these people are growing their own food, and that's a community, and it's an abundance, and he's changing the culture in, right in his home, right in his area.
Yeah.
So I love that.
Beautiful.
Thank you. I'd love to meet him. Yeah, I
I'll
love
do.
what you're talking about, John Liu. It's so beautiful. I really admire the way you think. I admire the way you have created this. I admire how you're not saying this is how you have to do it. You're saying you guys create what you want to create, the way you want to create it, as long as it works in harmony with restoring nature. And then we will watch and see which ones are the most successful, and we'll keep learning, and it's so beautiful. It's just,
Thank you. Well, I think it's also important to understand that we need to work together. It's about collaboration. And this also has to happen simultaneously all over the world. So having a mycelial network that connects people all over the world doing this, together we're more powerful. Separately and independently, we could be in silos and it's divide and conquer. We need to be united in this.
yes. And one of the things, just for people, if you don't know what he's talking about by a mycelium connection, under the ground, in the earth, mycelium, like underground mushroom type, are connecting the roots of all these plants and all these trees, and they work like an internet. And so what you're talking about by the mycelium network between us is, you're saying, and tell me if I'm wrong, you're saying that there's this place, this community that has restored this Garden of Eden is now creating a mycelium network, and now we're going to do this one over here, and they're eventually going to start connecting up, and we're going to start connecting up, and our connection with each other, I call it the internet. It's the part of us that is connected to everyone, that understands everyone, that impacts everyone in a positive or negative way, depending on what you're feeling. Like, I practice loving like the sun loves, which means I love if I shine if there's a hurricane, I shine if there's a tornado, I shine if there's rain or snow or a drought or whatever it is. I just keep trying to shine my love, because the sun is such a good teacher. And when you have that understanding of the inner net, or the mycelium network, it is just so beautiful.
Well, it's wonderful to talk with you, and it's wonderful to think that more people will learn about the ecosystem restoration camps and communities movement. And there's more to learn. There's a lot. If you share my academia page for those people who really want to look at the studies, the research that's been done in Mali or South Africa or Australia or Mexico or Ecuador or Mongolia or India, they can find all that there.
That feels really beautiful. I so appreciate you. Thank you for sharing your time, your wisdom, your love. I just feel how much you love this planet, and you love people, and you love the earth, and I really feel it. And so thank you. And I'm just supremely thankful.
Well, thank you. And best of wishes for your continued success.
Thank you, John.
Work.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to Stories We Love. I appreciate you so much. Check out the camps. We'll send the link again, and appreciate you so much. And we'll put the link in the, in the description. Thank you.